Rebecca Kemp Brent. I am fascinated by whole cloth quilts, which traditionally are sort of like the example you can see down front, that are done in a light color fabric with a medallion design. So they have something quilted in the center and then a border quilted around the edges. I love the texture of the quilting, especially after the quilt's been washed. So I decided I would experiment a little bit more with doing the whole cloth technique, but without doing the traditional medallion setting. I love feathers, feather quilting, and just now that I have some computer help, I can actually stitch feathers that look the way they looked in my head all along. So I've been enjoying working with computer software to arrange feathers in designs like this for a whole cloth quilt. I'm using a size that's about a yard by 45, 36 by 45 inches, give or take a little bit. That's really convenient. Battings come in that size, and it's a great size for a baby quilt, a crib quilt, even for maybe a lap quilt for a child. But if you wanted to take the same ideas and go bigger, the next batting size up is 60 inches by 45, and you can use exactly the same techniques. You can even use the same pattern. It's just instead of all those zigzag stripes of feathers going vertically, they'll go crossways on your quilt. So this is one of my feather arrangements where it sort of makes the diamonds in the middle. But the one I'm going to concentrate on for you today is this one. I like it because it looks like the chevrons that you can find printed on fabrics, which to me is a very lively and exciting design and one that I enjoy working with. So come with me and let me show you a little bit about how I'm going to take a traditional feather design and turn it into this zigzag arrangement. Now, I'm going to do most of my work on my computer screen here, but for those of you who are working by hand, I don't want you to feel left out. What I've done is I've traced off my basic feather design, and this is the unit, the building block that I'm going to start with, and you can see that I've made several of them. So what I would do is take these and just play with the arrangement a little bit. Maybe I could bend it, and then where I have a gap in it, you just take your pencil and sort of sketch in an extra feather there and tape these together, put them on another piece of paper with a few extra lines drawn in, and you have something that you can take to your quilt and transfer any way you like for doing hand quilting or machine quilting, any kind of work that makes you the happiest. I'm also going to talk about thread just a little bit. Whole cloth quilts traditionally are just about the texture, so the thread usually matches the fabric that you're stitching on. And I've sort of done that here with this quilt. You can see I have the sort of coral color on the back, and then on the front, just so it has a little more pizzazz to it, I've used a variegated thread. And that's one of my favorite techniques for machine quilting on any fabric. If you don't want your quilting to show, the variegated thread will often kind of help it blend in. But on a whole cloth quilt like this, that little bit of variation in the color actually makes the quilting pop a little bit better. So whichever you like, we have different kinds of thread you can use. Because I'm doing a whole cloth and I have a lot of quilting, I like to use the large spools, but the smaller spools work as well. Just be sure you sew with a good quality thread so that you don't have problems like thread breaks that really take away from the fun of doing the quilting. Now, if you look at my computer screen with me, I'll show you how I arrange these feathers into my chevrons. This particular part of my program is going to let me arrange an entire quilt right on one screen, and I start by selecting the pattern, which here is called Feather Long. And then we'll open that. And then I want to select all of the blocks in my quilt and place the pattern. Now, I've got a feather in every block, but obviously that's not the way I want my feathers to look. They're way too small. So let's go down here and take these buttons that say max and make the feather as big as it can get inside my block. That's still not really quite what I have in mind, but there's another block in the software, another icon, and this one will actually join the beginning and end points so that it covers the entire quilt with quilting. I like that in that it covers everything, but it doesn't have much style to it. So this is one of my favorite things to play around with, called row rippling. And I'm going to make sure all of my blocks are selected. There we go. And then I have several different choices, and you'll notice that they're separated into top and bottom. So that means that actually I can do something only to the top of each design, or I can do it to both the top and the bottom. Now there's a chevron. But I don't want just one chevron in my quilt. I want to have a lot of them. So let's do the same thing to the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to change the number of zigzags to 5. And now I have lots of zigzags. Still not quite what I'm looking for though. So let's take this back to the other screen for my layout. And I'm going to go into the size. And I'm going to change the number of blocks that I have. So I have more rows, and then I'm going to change the size of my blocks so that I have a long and narrow block instead of a square. And you'll see that that gives me the 32 by 40. That's just about what I want for the quilt size that I'm making. Now I did break apart my feathers, so we'll just do a little start over here, and we'll place the pattern again and change our size. But that means I get to show you the ripples one more time. And just for fun, I'll start with valleys this time instead. And let's go ahead and change the number. I'm going to put 5 ripples in it so that there's one for each block. And that's kind of fun. That's with, the bottom hasn't been altered yet. But since I have a quilt design I want to show you, let's go with the zigzag in the top and in the bottom. And now we'll go back to that layout screen. And this time I'm going to use the select option. And I can select rows of blocks, or I can select columns of blocks. I want the rows, and I'd actually like it to be not the first and third, the odd numbered rows, but the even numbered rows. So let's select the inverse. Now I'm not really going to change the appearance a lot here, but I'm going to go in and flip these feathers from side to side. And the reason is, if you look at the direction of the feathers, you'll be able to see that the feathers move from left to right in the top row, and then they move from right to left in the second row. So it dances back and forth across the quilt. That's a little bit more efficient way for my machine to do the quilting. And now we have our quilt design, so we'll save it and go over to the quilting machine where I can show you how this actually stitches out. Okay, I've moved over to my quilting frame, and now I'm going to be working with the software on a tablet, which you can see is mounted on the machine. It's the very same software, and I could have done the entire process right here on my tablet, but I used the laptop because it was a little bit easier for me to show it to you that way. So you'll also notice that I just have 2 of my rows of feathers shown on the screen. That's because the software knows that that's all that will fit in one frame. So it's going to stitch out those 2, and then it's going to give me some placement marks that I'll use to position the other rows all the way down my quilt. So let's get started with the quilting, and then I'll show you how that placement works. The first step is going to be pulling up my bobbin thread. And I'm ready to press sew, and we'll get started. Sometimes it takes just a minute for it to sort of cogitate. I guess I have to think first before I start sewing too. And it begins with a little bit of a tie-off stitch, and then it's going to dance right across the quilt top. Now I could clip these beginning stitches, the beginning threads, the tails, but you can also leave them in place, and then you can bury them with a hand sewing needle in between the layers of your quilt. And if you're making something like a baby quilt that's going to get a lot of use and maybe several washings, then you might want to take care of the thread tails by burying them just for the most secure finish. Okay, so my machine's gotten to the end of the first row, and then I'm just going to tell it that it can go ahead and move to the second row of feathers. You remember that we set this up so that it can sew from left to right and then back from right to left, and that's what it's going to do. Just a little bit of a tie-off stitch at the beginning again. It starts slowly, but then it picks up and it will sew the next row of feathers. Almost done, getting the last couple of feathers. Okay, and then it's going to tie off again. And then if you look at the screen here, it tells me that I've finished the zone and I'm going to proceed to the next zone. And when I do that, just ask me some questions just to be sure everything's taken care of. And then I'm going to get some options on my screen for stitching, a little bit of a guide that's going to help me place it for the next. So that's what this screen looks like. And to make that a little bit easier, I have some stickers. So I'm going to take one of my stickers and just slide it under the presser foot, just like this, and then tell it to sew a single stitch. And then I'm ready to move to the next mark. And you don't have to worry about actually having thread in this. The hole that it marked in the sticker, the little hole that it punched, is really all that I need to help me figure out where to put the quilt when I move it. Okay, so we have one mark at this end, and then I'm going to slide my little chair down and make one mark at the other end. And now it's ready for me to move the fabric in the frame. So let me take care of that, and then I'll come back and show you how we position the next pair of rows for stitching. Okay, so now what I've done is I've repositioned my quilt. I've tucked the part that's already stitched up here in the back out of the way, and my machine now, you'll notice, is right on top of that sticker. So all I have to do is make sure that the needle is right on top of the hole. I press A to tell the machine that that's the location, and then I slide down to the other end, position the needle right over the other hole. That's position B, and now I'm ready to start sewing again, and it's going to position the feathers exactly right, just the way it did on the quilt I showed you back at the beginning of the segment. This works all the way through the entire quilt. I can even do new areas to the side as well as below the ones that I've done, so I can make a quilt any size I want to. This is my new take on feathers, and I hope you'll have a little fun with it too.